Hello and welcome back to another update where I cover the latest developments throughout the front line in the Russo-Ukrainian war. We start out in the south in the direction of Robotyne, where the Russians have advanced east of the village into the forest patch area, where they've gained positions, captured the fortified position of the Ukrainians east of the village, and now have further solidified the control over Robotyne. There is this final part here to the north of Robotyne, which the Ukrainians still have control of, leaving it in a gray zone as Russians have control over the majority of the village, and leaving this part here as a fighting area. The Russians have yet to storm it, leaving it under Ukrainian hands. But with the fighting in the east, the Russians may be moving on to the next section, which is to fight over the next set of fortified positions and trenches the Ukrainians have control of northeast of the village. At the same time, there was some positional fighting northwest of Myrne, where the Russians were slowly expanding their zone of control over the area, and in turn the Ukrainians launched a counterattack here to the south of Myrne, where they are pushing towards Russian fortified positions here in the area. With this, the Russian trenches north of Battalion and near the village are under attack by the Ukrainian forces, as is seen with this geolocated footage. So with the geolocated footage of Robotyne and Battalion, we see that the Russians and Ukrainians continue positional fighting here in the Zaporizhzhia front. We also saw some movement west of Nesteryanka, which shows that the Russians have reactivated the front by doing or continuing positional fighting near Robotyne, as well as starting positional fighting near Nesteryanka and Myrne, and the Ukrainians are responding by being proactive and in turn storming Russian trenches and positions in the area to prevent them from concentrating the forces in one area and to spread about the area to avoid a Russian breakthrough in the section of the front line. Further east, we see here in the direction of Nedailove, the Russians have stormed the village of Karlivka, the eastern parts of it. With this, the Russians continue their offensive operations west of Nedailove towards Karlivka, which could indicate that the Russians would simply not stop by Nedailove and continue pushing towards the Ukrainian positions west of the area. This is happening as Russians have yet to secure Nevelske and the surrounding fortifications of the Ukrainians, nor captured fully Krasnohorivka. Without these two, the Russian attempts at the next line of defense are simply not that effective, but this could mark the start of attempts to gain a foothold prior to the Ukrainians fortifying their positions further in the area, taking advantage of the lack of fortifications the Ukrainians have prepared, and taking control of what is east of the Vovcha River going through the west of Karlivka. So simply gaining a foothold in the next line of defense of the Ukrainians. At the same time, positional fighting have continued in the direction of Yasnobrodivka, but there is no significant changes. In the direction of Jazov Yar, the situation has somewhat clarified. It is not yet clear if the Russians have secured their foothold across, but they have managed to capture the entire southern parts of Kalinia, which leaves the northern parts in a gray zone and the farm area north of it under Ukrainian control. At the same time, the Ukrainian fortifications north of it is still under Ukrainian control as well. This means that the Ukrainians still have a strong flank north by Ryorivka. As such, it is unclear whether the Russians are able to solidify a foothold across, but if they do, then they have significantly improved their positions and cut off the Ukrainian positions near Kalinia from direct supplies, and they would instead have to go through Ryorivka, and pushing through the northern parts would allow the Russians to cut off that supply line, as they already have cut it off from the north, which will make it easier for the Russians to capture fortifications southeast of Ryorivka. So this could spell a significant advantage for the Russians that they have cut off the supply route, and it would be even more significant if they manage to get the foothold, but even without that, it would still be a victory for the Russians. Further north, the Russians will likely push towards the northern parts of Kalinia and through the forest patch towards Ryorivka, as well as through the main road to the east of the village to push towards it and gain control of it, which will allow for a crossing north of Jazov Yar far from the city itself, similar to if they managed to gain control over the crossings here southwest of Ivanivske. As such, positional fighting continues here as well, as is seen with the territorial changes earlier. Moving up north to the Kharkiv offensive, we see that the is no territorial changes throughout this month yet, but we do see that heavy fighting is taking place. There are multiple video examples of this. The first one is this video here in the direction of Vovchansk, where we see a lot of smoke rising from the city and a lot of it simply being in ruins, specifically in the northern parts and near the river line. We see the bridge is blown, and this simply shows how heavy the fighting taking place there is. The apartment complex areas in the central parts of the town, where the Russians are currently fighting over to gain control of, while the Ukrainians still hold positions there, is also completely demolished by all of the explosions that are taking place at a constant rate. The Russians are constantly bombarding the northern parts of the town of Vovchansk, yet the Ukrainians continue to send additional troops across, and we see that in this footage here, which is a still image of an American M1256 Striker armored personnel carrier attempting to cross the Volkhya River with these pontoon bridges, and the second image shows that there is an additional one which is also destroyed. So the Ukrainians attempt to place these pontoon bridges to cross over with armored vehicles, yet they keep being blown. As such, the Russians continue to hit the Ukrainian crossings as they attempt to cross over and create new bridges to resupply and aid the Ukrainian soldiers in the northern parts of the town, and at the same time they're heavily bombarding the Ukrainian positions in the north. In this regard, there is this article here by the Washington Post talking about how the United States allowed the Ukrainians to strike within Russian territory. But at the same time, Kharkiv has burned in this period from the early May, where the offensive started, until now, which is early June, so almost a month. In this article, there is this excerpt from it, which is a personal account of one of the commanders of a reconnaissance battalion in Ukraine's 57th Brigade, Denis Yaroslavsky. According to him, the brigade entered the border town of Vovchansk on May 2nd, accompanied by 4 battalions of exhausted troops, so approximately 4,000 soldiers if at full strength, but unlikely to be, as they are exhausted troops or described as such. Fresh from the battlefields in a different northeastern city, likely the Kupiansk direction. They soon realized their new positions were the first line of defense, and that only 200 troops were already stationed in the town. When Russian forces pushed in just over a week later, he said, quote, "We lost almost the entire battalion." Yaroslavsky and his reconnaissance battalion were hunkered down in Vovchansk, just hoping to survive. That day, he said, his troops weathered an insane number of glide bomb strikes, more than 40 in 24 hours. This is just a third of what was hitting Avdiivka every single day during the final days of that battle. The founder of Kharkiv also said his troops had suffered punishing hits as Washington deliberated the policy shift. Over the past 20 days, he said, they have come under 250 glide bomb strikes, attacks so powerful that even those who are not badly wounded or killed are often traumatized and concussed by the shockwaves. After the airstrikes, Russian ground troops then stormed their positions, he said. Therefore, we see that despite the Ukrainian positions trying to hold their lines and sending additional troops to even attempt counterattacks, the Ukrainians are unable to succeed, and the main reason for that is the heavy bombing by the Russian Air Force. The Ukrainians need to send additional air defense near the front to deal with such air raids. However, the problem for the Ukrainians is that they do not have nearly enough air defense. If they simply move some of the systems they already have to the front, then the rear will be left unguarded, and the Russians can intensify their missile strikes across the country. And it doesn't help that the Ukrainian soldiers arriving at the front as reinforcements lack basic training, as is said in this article here. According to this article, the Ukrainian soldiers or the commanders complain that the situation is very difficult. The training centers do not provide adequate training for the new recruits. Ukrainian commanders are preparing for the arrival of most of the new troops with poor training. There are cases when, after training, the armed forces of Ukraine did not know how to shoot or disassemble weapons. The main reason for that is that there is little ammunition in training centers because they are saving it for troops on the battlefield. All the good fighters have already been taken by other brigades. You have to choose from the crooked, the lame, the sick. They complain to the armed forces of Ukraine. If there is a breakthrough near Chasiv Yar and we get new infantry that does not know basic things, they will be sent there to simply die, says one of the commanders of the Ukrainian armed forces. So we are seeing that the Ukrainians are facing a new issue following the expansion of the front line, and that is, despite there possibly being enough soldiers at the front right now, the more losses they take, the more reinforcements, reserves they need to arrive to help them plug the gaps. And there we see that these soldiers do not know even basic soldier stuff. So this could theoretically mean that the operation where we saw the Russians cross over in Chasiv Yar, cross over the canal, and the trenches were empty, maybe they weren't empty. Maybe the soldiers simply didn't know how to shoot. We don't know. However, something has changed in favor of the Ukrainians, and that is exactly the Ukrainians being allowed to shoot on Russian positions across the border. One such example is this video here of a Ukrainian drone operator team hitting a Russian truck column moving in the direction of the concentration of Russian troops near the northwestern parts of the Kharkiv border or southeastern parts of the Sumy border. With this video, we see multiple trucks being hit. However, we also see evidence of how it has changed since the start of the war. When the war first started, when artillery was hit or ATGM hit Russian tanks or vehicles in a column driving like this, they simply stand still, panic, or shoot back. Instead, we now see that they spread out. Some go to a side road, others drive into the field. They do maneuvers to avoid getting hit, and it has completely changed. And this is even troops who are operating on the Russian side of the border, where at the start of the war there were Russian troops within Ukraine. So we see that even the basic level of training for the Russians have significantly increased, while at the same time we hear stories from the Washington Post talking about how the Ukrainian soldiers don't even know how to shoot a gun. And that is going to be all for this update. Thank you all for watching. Make sure to leave a like, subscribe, and check out my Patreon for additional content. Thank you all for watching and have a great day.